Author Donna Jodhan presents Episode 6, Santa's Secret Sleigh Ride. Little Kerrie Freeseling had always wished for something special, and on a bright and starry night, her dream came true. And it was a dream that even she had no idea would ever happen. Kerrie Freeseling had been especially chosen by someone special to take part in a very special and secret event, and it is an event that she would never forget. Nor did several others. In years to come, she would retell the tale to all of her friends, family, and much later on, to her own kids. Santa's Secret Sleigh Ride, a tale of pure fiction of a dream come true. Written by Donna J. Jodhan.
Hello, hello, hello. It's Detective DJ, and welcome to episode 6 of my special Christmas mysteries. This is Christmas, and everyone should be happy, happy, happy. Compliments of the season to everyone, happy holidays to everyone, and Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope everyone is busy, just bustling around and rushing around, cooking and baking, shopping, doing everything that pertains to Christmas. Today, I'm happy to present you with episode 6 of my 12 Days of Christmas box set. Episode 6 is entitled Santa's Secret Sleigh Ride. And previously, I recorded for you 5 episodes. The first being Santa's Super Secret. The second being the President's Super Christmas Plane. The third being, and this was one of my favorite episodes, called Santa's Secret Toy Shop. The fourth was called Santa's Secret Christmas Ring. And the fifth was called Santa's Super Christmas Party. But now it is time to jump aboard with me and enjoy Santa's Secret Sleigh Ride, and I hope you enjoy it. Kerrie Freeseling, the Lady Lawyer. For those who really knew her, they would often say that there were several sides to this great lady, and boy, were there many of them. But at the end of it all, could anyone ever really say that they knew everything about this great lady? There was Kerrie Freeseling, the fearless prosecutor, strong, unafraid, articulate, always well-dressed, and feared by her fellow lawyers. Then she was a friend to many. Then there was Kerrie Freeseling, the mom, kind and gentle with her kids, slow to anger with her kids, but yet she was always there whenever she was needed, and always stern when it was needed as well. She loved to take them shopping at Christmas time, spending endless hours in the toy stores. Then there was Kerrie Freeseling, the lady. Loved to laugh and play video games, loved great food, and always up for a party, especially those at Christmas time, when her creativity would come out through her baking and decorating. Then there was something very secret that no one ever really knew about Kerrie Freeseling. a secret that she had guarded and protected for so many years, because she had promised to do so until the time was just right. And this is exactly what she had done. Sometimes it was easy to forget about the secret, but especially at Christmas time, it was most difficult to do so. The memories were carefully preserved, and they had remained so vivid over the years. Kerrie doubted that anyone would ever believe her, but it did happen, and she could not wait for the day when she would be given the sign to disclose everything. Ah, yes, at Christmas time, as Kerrie took her kids shopping, held Christmas parties for her staff, and attended so many Christmas parties herself. Christmas time, and Kerrie wrapped her presents and baked her cookies, took her kids to church on Christmas Eve, and stared solemnly at the manger, prayed to the baby Jesus, and stood with her kids looking down at the manger and Jesus lying in the arms of his parents, Mary and Joseph. And she had made her kids draw closer and touch the wise men and the shepherds. How could Kerrie Freeseling ever forget what had happened so many years ago? On a starry night just before Christmas, when the house was oh so still, and not even a mouse was willing to stir. No one could or would ever guess that this very prominent lawyer would have been able to guard such a deep secret for all of this time, and that this deep secret would turn out to be such a touching one. There was one thing about Kerrie Freeseling, the lady lawyer, that was not a secret, and that was the Christmas Eve when she had rushed out of her car to save a homeless man from being killed. The man was being attacked by a small group of teens, and Kerrie had seen it happening on a street corner as she was driving home from a late day's shopping trip. Without any hesitation, she had jumped from her car and had rushed up to the group of teens. And then she had started to shout at the top of her voice. And she had removed a noisemaker from her coat pocket, pressing it repeatedly until the teens had noticed her. At first they were stunned, but then they had left quickly, leaving the homeless man lying on the sidewalk, blood pouring from his face and his head. Kerrie did not hesitate. She had gone to the man's help and had taken him to emergency for treatment. She had stayed with him until he was treated, and then she had taken him to a small motel and had paid for him to stay there for a few days, asking the manager to ensure that the man had received warmed meals throughout his stay. Kerrie was very late for her own family on that Christmas Eve, but it did not matter. She had only tell them, or would only tell them, that Santa Claus had asked her to do something very special for him, and that she had done it. The kids believed her. It turned out that the man that she had saved was a former CEO of a downtown bank who had lost his job a few months ago and who had left his family at home because of embarrassment. His family had been looking for him, and thanks to the story that had been reported in the newspaper and the headlines, which stated, quotes, "Prominent lady lawyer saves homeless man," there was one family that had been reunited for Christmas. And Kerrie Freeseling had gone home that day with vivid memories of her secret of so many years ago. The time had not yet come for her to reveal it. Kerrie Freeseling, the mom. Kerrie Freeseling was a single mom with 2 great and wonderful kids, a daughter named Kirsten and a son named Kirk, and they were both preteens. Kerrie had been married at one time, but then there was a nasty divorce, and Kerrie had managed to win custody of Kirsten and Kirk. Her marriage had been a happy one for the most part, and had been so for the first few years, as she and her husband had been law school sweethearts and had married just before they had graduated. They had both found jobs at prestigious law firms, and everything had appeared to be going well. But then life had taken an unexpected twist, and Kerrie had found herself struggling to survive. First came the purchase of a new home in a grand neighborhood. Next came the kids, Kirsten, followed by Kirk. Then things had slowly begun to unravel. Kerrie had continued on her road to success, but it had not been quite the same for her husband, and soon the happy couple had found themselves arguing constantly, and then things had started to deteriorate. Soon enough, Kerrie's husband had found someone else, and on a bright Christmas morning, when Kerrie had awoken to the loud shouts of her kids, she realized that something was not right. Her kids were shouting, but they were not shouts of joy. They were crying for her, and now she had slipped out of bed and had hurried down to their room. There she had found her 2 kids sobbing their hearts out, and soon enough she had learned why. Kerrie was horrified and confused, but she had to act fast if she had wanted to save the day. Between sobs, her kids had told her what had happened. Santa Claus had left them a letter telling them that he could not leave them any presents this year, and that he had to leave on an important trip, not sure when he would be returning, so that they would have to do without any presents for this Christmas. Kerrie's astute mind had guessed who had written this letter and why. In short, her husband had left them because it was he, each year, who used to dress up as Santa Claus and bring presents to the kids while they slept. And now there were no Christmas presents for Kirsten and Kirk under their Christmas tree. Kerrie sat down on the floor and held her 2 kids very close to her, and as she did so, memories of that deep secret of so many years ago came rushing back into her mind, and the vivid memories almost made her forget her kids, but there was work to do, and she had to act fast. if she wanted to save Christmas for Kirsten and Kirk. After managing to settle down, she had told them to get ready for breakfast, promising them that she would have a great surprise for them afterwards. Then she had hurried into her study to make some important phone calls. She would deal with her husband later. 2 hours later, and Kerrie and her kids were about to enter a huge warehouse. And there they were met by someone familiar. Yes, Santa Claus, waiting, with a huge smile on his face, and open arms that the kids had run into. Kerrie had managed to pull some strings, and her friend Judge Jamie Jensen had done the rest. Now the kind old judge stood there as Santa, ready to help his prodigy save Christmas for her kids, and they were not disappointed. The warehouse contained rows and rows of all kinds of toys for little girls and boys, and Kirsten and Kirk had become mesmerized when they had beheld it all. They were only allowed to choose 3 toys, and after much hesitation on their part, they had indeed chosen some of their favorite toys, and then Kerrie and the judge had taken them back home, and soon enough exhaustion had set in, and they had gone to bed as happy little campers. Thanks to Judge Jamie Jensen, Kerrie had managed to save Christmas for her little girl and her little boy. But as they had sat chatting afterwards in Kerrie's living room, she had had to fight very hard not to part with that deep secret. Then the kindly judge had taken his leave, and Kerrie was now left alone to deal with her precious memories. Kerrie Freeseling, Young and Free. Kerrie Freeseling had been a free-spirited teen, and her free-spiritedness had accompanied her into her years at law school. She had done well in high school, had done well at sports, and had excelled at figure skating and chess. Kerrie had always managed to achieve whatever she had set out to do, while at the same time she was never lacking for friends. At times, however, her partying ways did enable her to get into minor scrapes. And each time that something had happened, she would promise herself to be more careful the next time around. Kerrie was often the center of attention, popular with both girls and boys. But this did not prevent her from keeping a level head. Kerrie was bright, humble, and a leader. She was considerate, thoughtful, and kind. And she would later tell others that her special experiences as a child, that deep secret which she had guarded all of her life, would often help to keep her on track. It was Christmas time, and Kerrie was in the Christmas spirit, celebrating with her classmates a few days before Christmas exams were over, and some of the students had decided to go home early. Others had decided to take off on ski trips, while others had decided to stick around and celebrate. Kerrie had decided to stick around for an extra day before going home, And on this particular night, as the snow fell gently, and as the Christmas wind blew fresh and cold, Kerrie and her friends had decided to go out for some Christmas drinks. They had chosen a nice homely pub close to the university's campus, so that no one would have to drive home, and if anyone were to have too many drinks, it would not be a problem to get back. All had been going to plan until they had arrived at the pub. Everyone was ready for celebrating and merrymaking. But then fate had had other ideas. The cops were there, and the staff were being questioned. Managers were being glum-faced, and as Kerrie and her friends had walked in, they had been told that the pub would not be opened tonight. There had been a robbery at the pub, and someone had been fatally wounded. Patrons were being asked to go elsewhere, and management had decided to close for the evening. What to do? Where to go? Her friends had become rowdy and restless, and soon Kerrie had begun to worry that things could get out of hand. She knew that her friends had been looking forward to this evening, while at the same time she also knew that if they did not find somewhere to go, they would probably end up going further afield, and who knows what could happen next. They were normally a good bunch, but like anything else, they were sometimes prone to getting off track, and with Christmas almost here, Kerrie had to find something for them to do. Then the memories of that deep secret of so many years ago came flooding back into her memory, and she knew that she had to act, and act now. And as the Christmas wind blew fresh and cold, and as the snow continued to fall gently, turning the ground into a white, fluffy carpet, Kerrie went into action. She mustered up all of her strength, and standing in front of her friends, she made the following suggestion. And believe it or not, her friends had gone and accepted it more readily than she had originally thought. And soon the group was making their way towards a Victorian home, standing tall and proud just a few blocks away. On the way, they had stopped to buy some Santa hats, some noisemakers, Christmas treats, a lovely little Christmas tree, and a Santa suit for one of the guys. Kerrie had rung the doorbell, and it had been answered by a kind-looking lady in uniform. She had seemed quite surprised to see Kerrie and her friends, but her face had soon lit up when she was told by Kerrie why they were there. The evening had gone more than just well. Kerrie and her friends had brought joy and cheer to residents of a senior's home. Kerrie had played Christmas carols on the home's piano, and the residents had sung, while her friends had handed out treats and goodies and had mingled out with the residents. One of Kerrie's friends had done a delightful job of playing Santa Claus. The residents had loved it all, and were sure sorry to see Kerrie and her friends leave. And as Kerrie lay in bed that night, she had smiled to herself telling herself that a deep secret of so many years ago was well and alive, and that someday in the future she would be given the sign as to when she would be able to disclose it. Kerrie Freeseling, the child. Kerrie Freeseling had been a very happy child, and the only daughter of Leif and Dana Freeseling. Her dad Leif had been a gynecologist, and her mom Dana had been a high-profile prosecutor, and Kerrie had always said that she had wanted to grow up to be just like her mom. Kerrie had been well loved by her parents, and most important of all, she had not been spoilt. Unselfish and considerate towards others. Christmases were always very special for the Freeseling family, because Kerrie's birthday was on Christmas Eve, and her parents had always gone out of their way to ensure that it was extra special for her. Yet, Kerrie had always noticed that on her birthday, her parents would almost always excuse themselves for an hour or so, and they would drive away in their car, returning a bit later, looking quite sad. They never said where they went and what they did. But on her 8th birthday, Kerrie had decided to find out, so that when her parents were not looking, she had snuck into the family's garage and had hidden herself on the floor behind the driver's seat. Her parents never knew, and so on that fateful day, Kerrie had found out why and where. Her parents had driven to a small cemetery about 3 blocks away from their home, taking with them a huge box wrapped in beautiful Christmas paper and a beautiful bouquet of red carnations and roses. And as a confused Kerrie had watched, her parents had gotten out of their car and had walked into the cemetery, stopping at a tiny grave. There they had laid the box and bouquet, pausing for a few minutes in silence, and then they had returned to the car and had driven home. Kerrie was beside herself with curiosity, but was afraid to ask her parents about it. So she decided to do her own investigation a few days after Christmas. She knew the way to the cemetery, but was a bit scared. It was not very far, but she could not really walk there. This would be challenging for her, but then Kerrie had hatched a plan. And early one morning she had snuck out on her bike and had gone discovering. The child had entered the cemetery and had started to wander around, and soon a worker had spotted her and had come running. Kerrie had been returned to her parents, and she had had no choice but to tell everything. In turn, her parents knew that it was time to tell her. The tiny grave had belonged to Kerrie's twin sister Kirsten, who had died at birth and had been buried there, and her parents had erected a tiny headstone in her memory, and on each birthday they had brought her flowers and a doll. Kerrie had cried when she was told the story, and now she had excused herself and had gone off to her room. Kerrie Freeseling's childhood dreams. Kerrie did not forget what her parents had told her about her baby twin sister. And each time she thought about it, a desire had intensified within her to learn more, but again, she was afraid to ask her parents, so her imagination had kicked in. Of course, she never did tell her parents about her newfound imaginary twin sister, keeping it a secret that only she knew. And at Christmas time, she would imagine doing all kinds of things with her sister, and especially so on her birthday. Kerrie had spun quite an imaginary tale for herself. Christmases with imaginary Kirsten were especially special. She and Kirsten would go shopping with her mom, visiting the crowded malls and spending endless hours in the toy stores. Their mom would buy them all kinds of wonderful things: dolls, tea sets, doll houses, makeup sets, puzzles, games, and much more. And the story continues for Kerrie and her imaginary twin sister. Then she and Kirsten would have tea parties and invite their friends to tea, and they would bake Christmas cakes and cookies in the kitchen with their mom, laughing and chatting among themselves and enjoying true mom and daughter's fun. Baking times, and they would treat their dad when he would come home from work. And the story continued for Kerrie and her imaginary twin sister. Then Kerrie and Kirsten would wake up early on their birthday, which was Christmas Eve, and they would sneak downstairs to find their mom preparing breakfast and their dad fussing with the Christmas tree. Over the lovely fragrance of the beautifully decorated pine tree, mingled with their mom's breakfast, and she'd be cooking their breakfast. It would be their favorite breakfast. And the story continued for Kerrie and her imaginary twin sister, Kirsten. Their birthday was always very special. Leif and Dana Freeseling would take their girls out to play in the snow after breakfast had been eaten, and then they would return at around lunchtime to get ready to go window shopping in the crowded malls. And the two sisters had had so much fun with their parents, holding tightly to the hands of their parents, who would surprise them by buying them each something special. Anything from a dress to a doll or a pair of shoes. And then it was back home for them to get supper ready. And then it was off to Christmas Mass. And the story continued for Kerrie and her imaginary twin sister, Kirsten. Kerrie's imagination did not stop there. She and Kirsten would sit quietly during Mass, first looking at the flickering candles at the altar and admiring the manger with baby Jesus lying in the arms of Mary and Joseph. And oh, how they loved the 3 wise men and the shepherds and the animals. And Kerrie and her sister would imagine that baby Jesus was their new little brother. And the story continued for Kerrie and her imaginary twin sister, Kirsten. Kerrie especially loved hearing the Christmas carols being sung by the choir. and she and Kirsten would try to sing along, but then both girls would end up falling asleep, and it would be up to their parents to bundle them up in their arms and take them home to bed. And the story continued for Kerrie and her imaginary twin sister, Kirsten. Kerrie and Kirsten did not awake until morning, and then it was time for them to check out under the Christmas tree. And then they would race each other down the stairs, whooping and shrieking with excitement. And there, waiting for them, were many presents from Santa Claus. And the story continued for Kerrie and her imaginary twin sister, Kirsten. Such wonderful childhood dreams, but only if they were true. And Kerrie knew this only too well. They were only dreams and nothing more. Oh, how much she enjoyed imagining, but oh, how much she yearned for it all. She yearned for it to be true, and she dared not tell her parents. And each Christmas, when her imagination had kicked into high gear, she had done her best to hide it all from the world. Her parents had continued the tradition of making her birthdays special ones, and now they would take her along to the cemetery on Christmas Eve and allow her to place the huge gift wrap box on her sister's tiny grave. And they had even allowed her to choose the beautiful doll for Kirsten. But things would quickly turn sad for little Kerrie after this, and on this special day, and her parents knew it only too well. Childhood Christmases at the Freeselings had now turned into a mixed bag. Sadness tinged with brave attempts to be cheerful. Then came the day when Kerrie's life was shattered. That awful day when she accidentally found out something that she was not supposed to have found out. The day that she had read her mom's diary. Kerrie Freeseling's special letter. Dana Freeseling had accidentally left her diary on her night table one day, and Kerrie had become curious and had been drawn to it. She had started to flip through the pages while her mom was occupied elsewhere, and her attention had been caught by a specific entry on one of the pages. The entry read, "The day I lost Kirsten." And there for the 10-year-old to read was everything that had occurred over 10 years ago, the fateful events of that fateful Christmas Eve that had taken baby Kirsten Freeseling from her family. Kerrie was horrified and stunned, and for a 10-year-old it was just a bit too much to process. She had quickly reread the page, and then she had rushed out of the room. Her mom did not see her daughter running out of the house, but then Kerrie had returned later at supper time, and now she could no longer hide her discovery. Leif and Dana Freeseling had done their best to comfort their distraught daughter, and the next few months for the Freeselings were difficult ones. But then one day, Kerrie had come up with a very bright idea. She would not tell anyone, not even her parents. And now that she no longer really believed in Santa Claus, she would write him a letter just for the heck of it. She had nothing to lose, and she was not sure how her parents would react. And so she did it. And on a late November evening, when the house was quiet and her mom was in her study and her dad was watching TV, Kerrie Freeseling wrote a letter and emailed it to the following address: Santa Claus at the NorthPole.com. Then Kerrie had gone to bed, not expecting anything to come of it. Her email to Santa Claus had been very short. She had first apologized for not really believing in him, but then she had put in her request to him, ending her letter by saying that she would understand if he did not grant her request. Then she had wished him a very Merry Christmas, signed it, and when she awoke the next morning, she quickly checked her emails and saw that her email had not bounced. And in fact, there was a notification in her inbox acknowledging receipt of her email. Kerrie did not think much of this and had hurried off to school. But now something was about to take place, which in later years the lady lawyer, Kerrie Freeseling, would tell everyone about. And it would be something that no one would be able to understand what had really happened here, let alone to explain why it happened. Kerrie Freeseling's special visitor. Ah, yes, Christmas was once again fast approaching. Just around the corner, as they would say. And in a matter of days, Kerrie would be celebrating her 11th birthday. So much had happened to Kerrie this past year. She was now in grade 6 and enjoying school. She had learned more about how her twin baby sister Kirsten had really died, and it had made her very sad. And at times she had wished that she had never found out. And, indeed, her parents would later confide to each other that they too were sad that she had found out, and they even thought that this disclosure had seemed to change their little girl. They had done their best to help their daughter, and she in turn had done her best to appreciate her parents even more. Christmas was here, and it was Kerrie's favorite time of the year. And this year she had asked Santa Claus not just for a special wish, but ice skates and a skating costume for her skating class, because she was now into figure skating, and a chessboard, because she had now joined a chess club. The night was a cool one, and Kerrie had decided to retire early, as she had had a full day at school and she was not feeling very well after supper. She had just had supper with her parents, and they had just told her that it was be okay for her to retire early. Kerrie had decided to open her window a crack to let in the cool, fresh Christmas air, and she had turned on the lamp on her night table, choosing to turn off the overhead light. The fresh, cool Christmas air had come into her room, and she had felt refreshed by its icy touch on her cheeks. Kerrie could also hear the sound of carolers in the distance as they strolled through her neighborhood, singing carols loud and clear. She had crept under her covers, and soon she was dozing peacefully. Then the Sandman had taken over and had led her gently into dreamland, and there she had met him. At first she did not see him, but then she had smelt something very sweet and pleasant. And then she had heard someone laughing with a loud ho, ho, ho. Tall, with snow-white hair and a snow-white beard. He wore a red coat and a red hat, and as Kerrie would later regale to her listeners, his eyes were sparkling blue, bluer than the skies on a cloudless day, and his cheeks were rosy pink, pinker than the sunset at a seaside. The tall man with the rosy cheeks and blue eyes had beckoned Kerrie forward, and she had done so, not being afraid. And when she had reached him, he had put his hands on her shoulders, and had then made a sign with her to walk with him. Kerrie had instinctively known who he was, and this is why she was not afraid. Kerrie and the tall man had then started to walk through snow-covered fields, where trees were covered in snow, and loads of icicles hung from their branches. As Kerrie and the tall man walked, he had started to talk to her, pointing out the scenery as they went. As they went, Kerrie saw ice skaters dressed in Christmas costumes, skating on outdoor ice rinks, and in the background there were Christmas trees all lit up with beautiful Christmas lights. Hundreds of lights that were red, green, blue, and yellow. Then she saw dolls dressed in red coats, pulling sleds with loads of laughing children, and sleighs loaded with adults drinking hot chocolate and eating marshmallows and toothpicks. Then Kerrie had marveled at the horse-drawn carriages going by, boys and girls driving mini cars with large snow tires, trains with passengers waving through the windows that were opened, and planes flying overhead, driving banners that said, "Merry Christmas." Then came the huge ice castles and tiny ice houses, the ice sculptures of all sizes and shapes, stores and shops made out of ice, and winking lights in the background behind them. And then Kerrie had started to hear the sound of bells ringing, and as they walked on, the sounds came closer and closer. Surprise, surprise, surprise! There was a Santa Claus parade coming towards them, and the tall man had told Kerrie that they should join it, and they did. Kerrie had soon discovered that it was indeed a Santa Claus parade, and the tall man had taken her to the front of the parade and had placed her on his shoulders. She was now in a great position to view much of the parade, and from where she was sitting on the tall man's shoulders, she knew that he was none else than Santa Claus. Kerrie saw dancing clowns, beautiful, colorful floats, ice skaters, skiers, people pushing gingerbread houses on wheels, fairies with wands, and storybook and Disney characters. There was Cinderella and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Mulan and the Mermaid, Aladdin, Robin Hood, and even Batman and Robin. There was also Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, and even Donald Duck, Daisy Duck, and Daffy Duck. And then there were Hansel and Gretel, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, Superman and Spider-Man, and so many more. Snow queens and kings, ice princesses and princes. And on it went. Kerrie was having the time of her life, but then they had reached a huge gate, and somehow the gates had opened on their own, and the parade had passed through the gates, continuing on, and then it was closed, and now she was left alone with Santa Claus. Kerrie Freeseling goes on his secret sleigh ride. Kerrie had begun to be a bit afraid as she watched the grand parade disappear into the night, but then she had turned, still seated on Santa Claus's shoulders. Santa Claus had lifted Kerrie down from his shoulders and had started to walk with her towards the sleigh. And as they drew closer, Kerrie could not help but whoop with joy. For there, standing beside the sleigh, were all of Santa Claus's reindeer, magnificently dressed in their Christmas clothes. Kerrie had begun to clap her hands when Santa Claus had lifted her up into the sleigh, and none other than Rudolph had stepped forward to greet her. Then, with a Merry Christmas kiss on each cheek, Rudolph had introduced her to her fellow passengers. Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, and Vixen. All of these were Santa Claus's reindeer. Then there was Gatineau Soapstone, the huge German shepherd, Beijing Jay, the huge kitten with the jade green eyes, and Skiffle the squirrel, and Barcode the bunny. Then Rudolph had buckled everyone in, and with Santa Claus at the controls, the sleigh had lifted off gracefully and quietly. Everyone was chatting all at once, and when Kerrie had asked where they were headed to, Santa Claus only laughed with the loudest of ho, ho, ho's. Kerrie was feeling so many things. She was mesmerized, excited, and a bit scared, but not scared enough to say anything. And as the sleigh glided silently through the air, she could not help but wonder where exactly they were headed to. Throughout the trip, Rudolph and the other reindeer kept their passengers fully entertained with lots of Christmas stories, lots to eat and drink, and they even played some board games. Rudolph also spent time helping Santa Claus to drive the sleigh. And from time to time, the other reindeer took turns sitting up front with Santa Claus and keeping him company. It seemed to Kerrie as if the sleigh was traveling around the world, because on the way Santa Claus had pointed out various landmarks to his passengers. The sleigh had flown over the Tower of London. Then it had travelled over the canals of Amsterdam. Then the passengers were shown the Eiffel Tower of France, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the gondolas of Venice, and the fjords of Norway. Then came the castles of Austria and the streets of Berlin. And when Kerrie had started to wonder what would come next, presto! She simply gasped when she saw the Taj Mahal of India and the Great Wall of China. Then came the barrier reefs of Australia and the Victoria Falls of South Africa. And then this was followed by the pyramids of Egypt. Then came the Rocky Mountains of Canada, the Grand Canyon of America, and the Andes of South America. Kerrie simply could not believe her eyes. Santa Claus was treating her to a whirlwind tour of the world, something that no one could ever have done on their own, and in such a short space of time. And it seemed to Kerrie that it was all taking place as time stood still. Then the sleigh was cruising over Copacabana in Brazil, the beaches of Sao Paulo, and then over the Angel Falls of Venezuela. Then it was hovering over the blue Caribbean Sea, and at one instant the Santa Claus had taken the sleigh down to just about 100 feet above the sea. And then and there, Kerrie could see pleasure boats and ships, yachts, and seagulls searching for food. Like Kerrie, the other passengers were simply in awe of everything. Skiffle the squirrel and Barcode the bunny both leapt for joy, whilst Gatineau Soapstone barked with delight, and Beijing Jade pawed at the fresh, cool Christmas air, and all of the reindeer just simply kept on smiling at everyone, and Santa Claus beamed with pride. Then the sleigh had started to slow down, and then Kerrie had felt its descent. Santa Claus had then told them that they were almost there. But what did he mean by almost there? Kerrie had no idea, and neither did the others. Then the sleigh had landed with a gentle bump, and as the morning sun smiled sweetly down on them, and as a flock of white birds hovered overhead, Santa Claus had slipped nimbly from his driver's seat and came around to fetch his passengers. What happened next for Kerrie Freeseling? At first, Kerrie Freeseling did not see someone running towards her, as her attention had been captivated by her surroundings. One of the most beautiful sceneries that she had ever seen. A gently flowing brook with brightly colored gold and yellow fishes swimming around in it, and it all lay before her. Fruit trees loaded with golden fruits surrounded them, and miles of fields with yellow cornflowers stretched before them. Then she heard it, the sound of running feet coming quickly towards her. And as she looked up, she knew instantly that Santa Claus had granted her wish. Kerrie had rushed forward to meet the running figure, and soon they were in each other's arms, laughing, crying, and hugging each other over and over again, and hugging each other so tightly. Kerrie's wish had been granted, and now she was united with her sister Kirsten. An onlooker would readily have said that it was difficult to tell the two sisters apart. Tall, slender, with golden hair and blue eyes as bright as the sky, their smile was the same, and they walked in the same way, and their gestures were the same. And the two girls both knew this. Kirsten told Kerrie that she knew everything that had been going on in the lives of she and her parents. And she told her sister that she was now an angel sent by God to keep an eye on her family. The two girls discussed what had happened at their birth, and why Kirsten had had to be the one to die. She also told Kerrie not to disclose the true story until she had been given the sign to do so. And she also told her sister that there were going to be 3 specific events in her life where she would be called upon to render assistance, and that she would be given the intuition to know what to do. Finally, she would know when the time was ripe to disclose everything. Kerrie had cried at hearing all of this, but Kirsten had only hugged her more tightly, telling her not to cry, but instead to return to her parents and continue her life. Then she had shown Kerrie where she had lived, and had told her about her own life. Kirsten was an angel, living with other angels and helping to do good things and watch over their families. Now it was time for the two sisters to say goodbye, and Kerrie had begun to cry once more. But before she could catch her breath, Kirsten had slipped a small golden crown into her hand, and as she had watched mesmerized, Kirsten started to ascend into the air, waving and smiling to Kerrie as she did so. Then she was gone, and Santa Claus was by her side, leading her gently towards the sleigh, where the others were waiting for her. Kerrie had no idea how much time she had spent with Kirsten. Then the sleigh was airborne, and soon enough, Kerrie's third adventure. Kerrie was now a mom of 2 teenage kids, Kirsten and Kirk, and her career as a successful lady prosecutor had continued to flourish. Her mentor, Judge Jamie Jensen, who had helped her to save Christmas for Kirsten and Kirk some years ago, had continued to be her main support after she and her husband had divorced. and her parents Leif and Dana Freeseling had now retired and were living close by. Kerrie had continued to keep her secrets from the past well protected and safeguarded. But it was not without some temptation from time to time that she had wanted to tell her kids, her parents, and Judge Jamie. Kerrie and her family were very close, spending Christmases together and going on vacations together whenever time permitted. And Judge Jamie and her had developed a close mentor-mentee relationship. And the judge's kids had become friends with her kids, besides or despite their age differences. And Judge Jamie's wife had become a second mom to Kerrie. Now it was Christmas once more, and Kerrie was hoping that this would be the year when she would encounter her third adventure. And true to form, she was not to be disappointed. But like the two previous ones, she was surprised when it did indeed come sneaking up on her. It had been a very busy Christmas time for the Freeselings. Kirsten and Kirk had been kept busy with school activities, and they had also been involved in other activities, going here and there with friends. And Kerrie had taken time to attend staff parties and Christmas functions given by associates. And now she was preparing for a Christmas visit from her parents. The night had gone reasonably well. The kids were out with their friends, and Kerrie had been left on her own. And she was very glad that the house was now quiet, as it had given her time to think and do some stuff on her own, but not for too long, as the silence had been shattered by a ringing phone. Kerrie had sighed deeply when she first heard its rings, and had been tempted to ignore it. But, alas, she had reached for it, and it was the hospital calling. It was the hospital where she had often volunteered at its sick kids ward. Kerrie had listened closely to the caller. Then she had put down the phone and had stood for a moment just thinking. True it is that she was going to have a full house for Christmas, and true it is that her family would want her to be there with them. But there was a little girl out there in a hospital bed. The little girl's parents were both dead, and her family lived far away in Eastern Europe for treatment by an international agency. The hospital's head nurse in the sick kids ward had been trying all afternoon to find someone to take the little girl for Christmas, and she would have done so herself, but she had to work during the Christmas holidays. The head nurse would have preferred not to have been asking for Kerrie's help, because she knew how busy Kerrie would be at this time, and she also knew how many hours Kerrie had already volunteered, giving of her time to the kids. Kerrie had hurriedly scribbled a note to her kids and had left it propped near the phone. And then, with her parka halfway zipped up and her car keys jingling in her hand, she had walked swiftly to her garage and had driven her Mercedes in record time to the hospital, as traffic had been light that night. With Christmas Eve being the next day, most of the hospital was already semi-deserted, and as Kerrie walked down the deserted hallway leading to the children's ward, she could hear her boots echoing on the tile floor as she walked. The head nurse had met and escorted her to the little girl's bed, and as Kerrie had looked down at the tiny figure just lying there clutching a stuffed teddy bear, she realized that the toddler was blind, because the tiny child was feeling around on her bed for her toys. The head nurse had somehow forgotten to mention this to Kerrie, but the lady prosecutor had not been daunted, and as the head nurse watched, Kerrie had sat down on the child's bed and had reached for the tiny hand. Soon she was talking gently to the tiny child, calling her by name and stroking her cheek and hair. And it did not take long for the child to respond with a shy smile. The anxious expression on the tiny face of the child had now been replaced with a healthy glow. The head nurse was extremely grateful and relieved, and had helped Kerrie to put the child's things together. And with a small suitcase in one hand and little Alexa sitting comfortably on her shoulders, Kerrie had walked out into the cool Christmas air. And it was a Christmas to remember for everyone. Kerrie's family had welcomed the little girl, and everyone had gone out of their way to make her feel welcomed. She was showered with lots of toys from everyone, and Kerrie's parents had taken to her, teaching her to call them Grandma and Grandpa. Kirsten and Kirk had taken her out to the malls every day, and had even taken her to the nearby park, where they had put her in a mini sleigh and had given her sleigh rides. Judge Jamie and his wife had dressed up as Santa and Mrs. Claus on Christmas Eve and had brought lots of presents to little Alexa. And as Kerrie would later reflect, everyone had gone to bed. Christmas had come into the heart of a precious little one. And as she smiled to herself as she stood there, looking down at a little Alexa, sleeping peacefully in a tiny bed next to hers, she thanked God. And as Kerrie slept that night, she dreamed deeply, and in it her sister Kirsten had come to her, telling her that her third adventure was now complete. The time had come for her to tell her story. Kerrie Freeseling's story. It was now New Year's Eve, and the family had gathered around, and Judge Jamie and his family were also there. And as Kerrie sat relaxed in her chair, she did her best to make her story short and sweet, as they would say. Kerrie and her twin Kirsten had been born on Christmas Eve to Leif and Donna Freeseling, and they had been born as Siamese twins. But unfortunately, doctors had told the Freeselings that only one of the twins could be saved, and that they had to choose which one would be saved. Both would die if the decision would not be made within hours. And each baby girl had an equal chance to live if chosen. The Freeselings had been devastated and had agonized over the decision. And at the end, they had closed their eyes, and Dana had chosen the one that had been lying furthest away from her. Before making their choice, the Freeseling had named their baby girls Kirsten and Kerrie. Death for Kirsten was quick and painless. The tiny baby girls had looked so much alike, with fine golden hair and chubby pink cheeks, blue eyes and chubby little fingers. They had both cried at birth and had seemed healthy enough. And at first the doctors were hopeful that they could be successfully separated. But then came the bad news. Leif and Dana Freeseling had tried to keep this a secret from their daughter. But the day she had caught them going to the cemetery was the day that they had to tell her, but they had not told her everything. Then Kerrie had discovered the rest, that she had read her mom's diary, and then her life had changed forever. Then came her childhood dreams, creating an imaginary sister and naming her Kirsten. Next came her letter to Santa Claus, expressing her wish to meet her dead sister Kirsten. And finally, the extraordinary events, where she had met Santa Claus, who had walked with her through the fields and shown her all of those wonderful things, and then claimed the sleigh ride, and her meeting with her sister Kirsten. Finally, what Kirsten had told her about the three events that would happen in her life. Of course, Kerrie knew that it had all been a dream. And the only way that she could bring some logic to it was to say that it had been fate's way of helping her. And she had named her daughter after her dead twin sister. Then she had produced the little golden crown, which she said had been given to her by her dead sister Kirsten. Her listeners were simply astounded and had no response to it all. Leif and Dana Freeseling had begun to cry, and Kirsten and Kirk, Kerrie's kids, had soon followed suit. Judge Jamie and his wife had simply sat there shaking their heads, and the judge's kids were simply speechless. But then everyone had begun to speak all at once, and soon it was time to bring in the new year. Kerrie Freeseling's Traditions. Kerrie Freeseling adopted little Alexa, the little girl that she had brought home that day from the sick kids' ward of the hospital where she is a volunteer. And she has started to learn Braille in order to help her new little girl. Her older kids have both welcomed Alexa into the family, and the little girl is simply thriving. Kerrie has started to establish some new Christmas traditions for she and her family to go caroling at a nearby senior's home, to serve Christmas dinner at a nearby homeless shelter, and to bring Christmas cheer to those lonely kids who are unable to go home for Christmas. There was a logical explanation for the golden crown that Kerrie had shown to her listeners on that New Year's Eve. As she slept that night so many years ago, her mom had come silently into her room and had placed it into the half-open hand of her sleeping daughter. The golden crown had been a gift to Dana Freeseling from Kerrie's granny. So at the end of it all, it was Kerrie who had gotten the last surprise. She had had no idea that it was her mom who had placed it in her half-open hand so many years ago while she slept. I'm Detective DJ, and I hope you enjoyed this episode, episode 6 of the 12 Days of Christmas box set that I have recorded especially for you. Episode 6, Santa's Secret Sleigh Ride. I want to wish each and every one of you a very, very Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to everyone. A toast to all of you from me and my team. Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, happy everything. You take care, and I'll be back with episode 7 in just a while. Bye for now, and ho, ho, ho.